Today was hard. Hi guys, welcome back. Today was the third round of the Grand Swiss Chess Championship in Riga, Latvia. It is not getting any cooler in terms of weather. The tournament is getting cooler, of course. Brrr, it's cold in here. There must be some Grand Swiss in the atmosphere. I'm gonna stop right there. Anyway, welcome back, and today I played against Hoang, which I believe is her last name, and she's a grandmaster from Hungary. Let's jump straight in. I feel like I had a lot of chances during the game, and to be honest, I'm very happy I didn't look at her title. I didn't know I was playing against grandmaster, but after the game had come to an end, unfortunately I did flag, but I didn't feel as bad. Although I did feel pretty, perturbed. Anyway, let's jump in. So the game went e4, e6. Yes, today I played against my very own opening. My opponent pulled an Uno reverse card, played the French against me. The reverse Hon baguette. d4, d5. And usually I go for the exchange variation just because it leads to a very dry, boring game. And that's exactly what I wanted against such a high-rated player as well. But I took a look at some of her games and decided to go for the advanced variation. And she spent a lot more time than I did in the opening, and I felt a little bit more confident since I had at least 10 minutes more on the clock. So here's c5 and c3. The usual move here is knight to c6, followed by either f4 or knight to f3, but here my opponent decided to play queen to b6, probably trying to confuse me by, mixing up the move order a little bit. But to her surprise, I play the French, so I know these lines. And here I just went with knight to f3, bishop to d7, and her plan became very apparent. Bishop to b5 was the threat to try and exchange the light squared bishops. For those of you who don't know much about the French defense, or who are trying to learn more about the French, one of the main plans that black has is to remove the light squared bishops from the board, because black's light squared bishop is very weak and white's light squared bishop is very strong. And quite the opposite is true for the dark squared bishop. The dark squared bishop for black is strong, and the dark squared bishop for white is not so strong. And the reason is because of the static pawns in the center. As you can see, black's pawns are on light squares, rendering the bishop rather weak, since it is struggling for range, and so on. So here, bishop to b5 is the aim. And I did actually check on my way back to the hotel while I was in the bus the accuracy of this game. And to be honest, my accuracy, as per chess.com, was 90%. And my opponent's 99%. So I don't feel too bad. So here, a3, bishop to b5 was quite expected, and b4 was the best move. Here, if my opponent decides to take on f1, I will just win a pawn with b takes c5 or d takes c5. I probably would take with the b pawn here, just because it strengthens my center, and then later on take with the rook. In case of queen to b5, rook takes f1. But instead, my opponent decided to take on d4, which led to exactly the same position if she were to take on b4 instead. Bishop takes b5 check, queen takes b5, and taking on d4. And here I feel like I have a spatial advantage, and I felt rather confident in this position. I knew I was going to get in knight to c3 with a tempo, meaning she would have to move her queen again while I get developed. And now just a few moves I'm going to speed through as to not have this video last another 17 minutes. I know you guys have much better things to do, but here I wanted to note something. after knight to c4, or maybe even before knight c4. If you were to take a look at black's position and count how many pieces are developed, you would come to the conclusion that there are only 3 pieces developed. And white's position, 1, 2, 3, 4, and castling is a developing move too. So I have here 5 pieces developed compared to black's 3. It does get better. So after rook c1, as you can see here, all my pieces are doing something. The knights are developed, the bishop is developed. Perhaps we could improve the square that the bishop is on later on. Queen is developed, the rooks are doing something. So I feel like in this position, I am utilizing my pieces quite well. But here, I think the compensation that black has with a knight on c4 becomes pretty overwhelming. So my main plan here is to get rid of the knight. So after knight to c8, trying to probably consolidate here, and I feel like there's a lot more that I could have done to stop the series of moves. So a4. And a4 is a tricky move to play because bishop to b4 is completely out of the question. It leads to knight takes d5, and if bishop takes d2, here I can simply play knight to c7 check. If the queen takes, I play rook takes c4. The queen will have to move and I pick up the bishop with the knight. So that is quite nice. Alternatively, if bishop takes b4, knight takes d5, knight obviously cannot take on d2 since the queen is hanging. So there is a lot that can happen after bishop takes b4, but none of which is in black's favor. So here she decided to play queen to d7 instead. And once again, I revisit the whole point of how many pieces have I developed compared to my opponent. And it's 2 for black. I do not count the knight on c8 since it is blocking the rook on a8. Although the compensation is probably so overwhelming and beyond my understanding that I cannot really use the principle of, being very, very well developed here. My screen just lit up. So what I'm doing, I'm recording the video with my camera, I'm recording the audio with my phone, and I'm recording the position with my computer. So it's a bunch of things going on. I just have to make sure that everything is working. Alrighty. So we continue. So my plan with knight to d1 was to go to knight to e3. I felt as though if I were to exchange the knights, the knight on c4 for the knight on d1, the advantage I have with development could be even more apparent. So here bishop to e7, just a normal developing move for black, and I continued with knight to e3. Knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, and knight to b6. I wanted to see if I could start an attack on the king side. Although I did not really have as many pieces on the king side as I would like, after black castles, it could indeed be a plan since my pawns on d4 and e5 have secured the space I need to start that attack. e5, e4, castles, and here I felt as though I had the chance. Perhaps I should take, but okay, I feel like in this position what I played was alright up till this point. And this is a huge critical moment. I would love to know in the comments what you guys think of this position, what your evaluation of it is, and how I should proceed. There were so many ideas that I had, including knight to g5, bishop to g5, rook to a3, and rook to f1. These are all ideas that I could use in order to start a potential attack, but here I think I played incorrectly. I decided to play rook to a3, which could be a huge inaccuracy, although I don't know the evaluation of this move at all. Rook to c8, decided to exchange it so it doesn't become a burden later on. Knight to g5 exchanging, and I completely missed queen to c6. What queen c6 threatens is knight to b4 and queen to c2. So if I were to play a move like queen to g4 threatening this, black would simply play, I think, queen c2 anyway. And if I were to play bishop to h6, then there's queen d1. Or worst case scenario, the queen comes back to g6. So I'm in a big pickle here and decided to play rook to a1, threatening rook c1 at some stage. But here h6 was played, and unfortunately rook c1 now would be a huge blunder. Can you see black's response? Yes, knight to c3 would be the response, and quite honestly, I'm terrified of this position. If I were to take the queen, there would be knight to e2 check, and if the king goes to f2, there is rook takes over here. Or maybe it's not that bad, maybe I was just overreacting. Knight to c3, queen takes. Yes, of course, knight to e2, king f2, rook takes. Maybe it's not so bad. It's actually not so bad. I clearly did not analyze this position properly and calculate properly. Or maybe it is a bad move, I don't know. You guys can let me know. So I decided to just retreat the bishop, and I was in time trouble here. I had 7 minutes on the clock versus Hoang's 25 minutes. Queen to c2 and queen to e1. If I were to exchange here with queen takes queen, rook takes queen, unfortunately I feel like I lose a pawn. Somewhere along the line one of these pawns will fall, and I would much prefer to be a pawn down with queens on the board than not. So here queen to e1, queen to b2, best move, and king to h1. Queen takes d4, rook d1, and after the next few moves, I did feel as though I had a chance to come back. And in this position, I wanted to play queen to e3 and try to get the queen to d4. But as I played this move, unfortunately, I flagged. But huge congratulations to my opponent. I enjoyed the game thoroughly. And I think the fact that I felt bad after my game meant that I really cared about the game and felt like I had chances. Anyway, guys, you'll be seeing me tomorrow, where I will try to turn my zero of an egg into a 1 or a half. So stay tuned. Bye, guys.